A lot of folks aren't. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar. Well, I would just tell you straight up, we're going to be having fun for the next
Yeah.
45 minutes approximately. But most importantly, we're going to be talking about how AI is reshaping technical documentation. Han is co-founder of Mintlify. Mintlify helps you ship amazing documentation like this. That's my 5 seconds pitch. And I'm
I
William.
love
I'm a founder of Hackmamba, and we help companies use Mintlify to ship documentation like this. So basically, we create human written content for our partners. But I'll let Han, the man of the moment, do his intros himself. So Han, over
oh,
to you.
oh man, I can't. Oh, I don't know why I'm the man of the moment. I think you are one. Hello. My name is Han. I am one of the co-founders of Mintlify, and we help companies, to your point, William, build really, high converting, beautiful, and increasingly more AI native developer documentation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we're going to be talking about the last part, which is um, increasingly build AI native developer documentation, which
Mhm.
is great. I think for everyone on the stream, you're probably curious: how can AI help me create better documentation? How can I create it fast? There's also been a lot of advancements lately. I don't know if I'll call them advancements lately because it's sort of like every week at this point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but we've seen LLMs, the text proposal, sometime in September. We've seen MCP sometime in November become like really popular, and a lot of folks building out tools and ways for AI agents and AI solutions to connect to their products. We're going to be talking a lot about that. Um, but I'm also curious. One big question that I get
Hmm.
almost weekly at this point is how do AI systems
Yeah.
index my product or
Yeah.
index my tool or my solution?
Yeah.
That's a common question I get. But to the
Yeah.
audience, you have an answer to this. I'm going to share how I've been able to do some of it at the end of this stream, at the end of this webinar. But
Yeah.
if you do have an answer as to how it's worked for you, just feel free to put it in the chat. Has it
Yeah.
worked for you, Anne? Have you been able to do that?
Yeah. I'm actually very curious to how you've experienced this and how it's impacted potentially, writing the docs on the side of it as
Hmm.
well. I think there's a few things, obviously just to kind of clear out, which is that regardless of whether or not, like how it's indexing, the first of all, the certainty that it is, 100%, um, and that it as a source of content is now informing LLMs in terms of like, when users ask questions about your product, it is just the way it's getting picked up a lot of these answers.
Yeah.
I think for a decent amount of time, probably up until I would say like even middle of last year, it was literally just the LLM scraping the entire web, during the whole indexing period and trying to get all the data collection, all of that stuff.
Hmm.
And it probably just read the content in the standard structured DOM, like the HTML DOM
Hmm.
it just existed in. And so it was able to make use and infer a lot of that information. And it was good for up until, for a decent amount of bit because it's just in, kind of collecting data mode. The
Hmm.
issue was that a lot of the data was not very properly structured, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, like you're just getting a bunch of like a loaded text. You don't know what categories a certain topic might actually belong to. It's hard to kind of infer that information. And so up until like earlier last year, there were all of these like different proposals that came in and about that was like, oh, let's go figure out how we can actually go standardize some way for LLMs to actually read the structured content and actually be able to engage with it really well. William, have you heard of the llms.txt
Yeah.
proposal?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've heard of that. I think I
yeah,
saw it first in September, but I also
yeah,
saw, I think Mintlify championed or created like a post around it. That was how I
yeah,
got even more informed
yeah.
around it. But could you share more about LLMs as TXT?
Yeah. So the funny story, and I have some really like interesting lore on this, is that
Hmm.
LLM.txt as a proposal came in pretty early. I think it came as like a written proposal by this really influential open source developer. I think it was like over a year ago. Sorry, like over a year ago from when we then did it. So it was like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe 23, sometime in 23. Put out
23.
this,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
I thought it
put
was
out this,
24. Like,
the llms.txt proposal initially came really early, I believe.
oh,
Like
okay.
it didn't pick up steam and didn't like get adopted by most folks until like middle of like, or end of 24, I would say, especially end of 24. But the proposal was kind of sitting around for a while. And effectively, llms.txt basically was like almost built to be like a sitemap.txt, where it's like, sitemap dot, like, or a robots.txt was built for SEO purposes, was helping Google crawl the web. We wanted a way to help LLMs do that as well. And so that proposal came out, and it was just kind of out sitting there, collecting dust, I think, for a pretty decent amount of time. And then I think just through the grapevine, more companies who are starting to experiment, with trying to be more LLM friendly started to adopt it as well. And so we noticed that some other startups were building it for their own docs. We noticed that some people were building it for their landing pages. And then at one point, we're like, you know what? Like, we don't know what the merits of this is. We're not 100% sure on like how this is. We're not even sure if the LLM providers are actually reading and indexing on the content here. But like, let's try it anyways. We'll just put it out there. It's not much of a lift for us to go and build this for all of our customers. Let's just go do it. And I remember we did it, launched it. And then there were all of these different articles that came out. They were like, oh, like, like Mintlify started building, LLM.txt overnight. All these different companies started adopting all of that, like the LLM.txt standard. And then I think it just kind of kicked off this kind of like frenzy around a lot more people starting to adopt it.
Yeah.
I think the Anthropic, obviously one of the big LLM providers, was then started championing it. So they were like, oh, like, like, yeah, because we had a conversation with them at one point. And I remember they're like, guys, can you go could you actually go adjust the LLM.txt in this particular way? So we at Anthropic could have go ingest this content.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of probably the moment in which these LLM providers started to take it a little bit more seriously, and then officially built it into their ingestion process for data. And so looking it into today, I think you can get away with just properly structuring content, but really applying like great LLM, like SEO almost, is adding a layer of LLMs.txt.
Yeah. Have you been able to see, like, have you seen any success with the LLMs of TXT so far in maybe more recent models?
Yeah. I think the way in which we're trying to quantify and actually measure, like, like LLMs.txt, before and after, in terms of whether or not it's affecting the actual result, is still in the air. Because the reality is that the LLMs are able to kind of get the content as is, regardless of it. The LLM.txt is just kind of a way of actually directing it and categorizing content and sections of pages for better accuracy and information sorting. And so I've personally yet to see some good benchmarks on this myself.
Okay.
So there's definitely a bit of a question mark that's still in the industry, but I would say that like what I am seeing though is what I know for a fact is that this is now being crawled and like indexed via LLMs.
Yeah, that's amazing. Is this, so I found this link on like llms.txt.org. Is that the best resource to sort of describe it to anyone that's curious as to what llms.txt
Yes, it is.
means and how to use it?
Yes, it is.
Well, for anyone listening, just imagine an alternative to having the sitemap.xml file, but this time around, it just helps describe your website or page for LLMs and AI tools to crawl, or scraping data, collecting data from your website to help them understand how your website is structured. If you've done some web scraping in the past, especially at scale, you know how difficult the problem is to manually scale like web scraping in general. So I think having an open standard probably is the way to go. Um, well, on the agenda today, we do have like a number of topics we want to touch on. So I'll just
Yeah.
go over those quickly. So while we'll still get back to how to get your product or your pages indexed by AI tools, we want to talk about what AI native documentation means.
Yeah.
How can AI streamline writing? Um, why do docs need to be LLM friendly? I have an interesting use case for this actually, coming from like coming
Yeah.
from developer marketing land. I was just looking at one of our customers' analytics today, and I see that they're ranking number one for a lot of keywords,
Yeah.
but the keywords like the pages aren't marketing pages; they're actually documentation pages.
Mm,
Around 80 to 90% of them
yeah.
where documentation pages driving marketing traffic for them.
Yeah.
So again, we're going to talk about why the docs need to be LLM friendly. What are
Yeah.
MCP servers? I think this is the hottest topic at the moment.
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
what are MCPs?
Yeah.
I feel like I go on Twitter, I just scroll like just two scrolls, and I see one new MCP server in front of me.
Yeah.
uh, we're going to talk about how far away we are from self-managing docs. A number of
Mhm.
teams that are constrained with resources are always looking at how can we ship great docs with
Mhm.
as little effort as possible.
Mhm.
And we also leave some time for anyone in the audience to ask
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
So we could just get straight to it.
Yeah.
Han, in like in your own words, what does
Yeah.
AI native documentation mean? What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Putting you on the spot.
Ooh. I think the thing is, when people talk about like, docs for AI, I
Hmm.
always tend to think of it from a, first principles perspective, right? Which is like, I think there's a lot of companies out there trying to obviously, build with AI. And I think kind of like a bit of a fallacy that typically comes out of that is like, you're just applying, AI word, a buzzword into something, you know, and,
Yeah.
trying to make it sound really exciting. And, as kind of like a builder at heart and a problem solver, I think that, you typically want to index a little bit more heavily on what is it that you're truly kind of trying to solve.
Hmm.
And kind of like, and like, what does that look like more than just attaching a solution proposal in of itself and making it sound exciting.
Yeah.
And so when we start thinking a little bit about, what does like how does AI impact docs, um, we kind of came to the conclusion ourselves that it has a much bigger role than I think what most people realized, right? Because docs serve as the source of truth between, your company, your product, what you're doing, and your users. At a very fundamental level, it's what the LLMs in some ways are trying to kind of achieve for the end users as well. And by managing and building that source of truth, which again, like LLMs
Hmm.
are trying to index and process to then serve, to build the utility they have, it actually plays a really central role, you know,
Yeah.
in actually kind of making all this stuff happen. And so, first of all, one thing that we thought was, okay, like what were the big, like, what is our worldview in terms of like, okay, if people are now using, LLMs to get answers, like, what does that look like for docs, right? And by the way, I'm sure
Yeah.
this came as a surprise to nobody that, a lot of people are asking questions directly to ChatGPT about your product versus, like just, looking through the docs itself.
Yeah.
Um, Many folks, and I think that's just like a small glimpse of I think the what the future is going to look like. Our opinion, first and foremost, on this is that when you're building docs nowadays, um, it's about 50% for humans and 50% for LMs,
Hmm.
right? Which is a
Yeah.
huge shift from what it was even a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Or and especially 2 years ago, when
Yeah.
us,
Yeah. It's definitely a massive shift.
yeah,
Because I started thinking now, if I were to go forward in time to
yeah,
10 years from now, we've had
yeah,
like advancements in AI, like
yeah,
insane ones.
sure,
What would documentation look like? Would documentation be, the Mintlify search bar that's AI native, that you could just ask
yeah,
questions? But
yeah,
what would the experience look like? As a visionary,
yeah.
how do
I
you see it? Like, what can you imagine that
Yeah.
world would look like?
Yeah. I think the way that I think about it is,
Mhm.
it's actually like, it's not much of a thought exercise on what the future is going to look like, in my opinion, as much as
Mhm.
what usually happens when, something like this comes up. Um, and what I mean by that is, like, first of all, the question is like, is docs still going to exist, in, let's
Yes.
say, 10 years from now when AI can do everything? And my answer is absolutely, but I think it's going to exist in a very different form of it, and it's going to serve a different purpose. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is, like, very simply, just because the internet exists doesn't mean that books disappeared, right? Just
Yeah.
because
Okay.
Google came about doesn't mean that, like, Wikipedia, in long form content, disappeared at all. There is a use case for, like, information retrieval that is more personalized, more easily accessible. That will always be the case.
Okay.
But in the advancements of all of that stuff, there is still a market for someone who wants to go pick up a good book and read it front to back. There is still a use case of someone who needs to go read a Wikipedia article or textbook to understand, like, what they don't already know. And so a lot of people, even today, they're like, oh, it is just going to be all search. Like, everyone's just going to, like, use, ChatGPT. The problem I always saw with that was that sometimes people don't actually know what they look for, and they just want to get, an answer to it all.
Yeah.
And I think in that world, the long form text of docs is still very much going to be, alive and well. But I think even more importantly than that, you know, the content and the role of content being the source of truth matters even more in that world, where instead of having, like, trying to build it in a way that's actually trying to, get people to read
Mhm.
all of it, um, there is that world where it's just built to then feed information for LMs to then do a better job at distributing and narrating and describing the content than it ever could. So a lot of different thoughts on
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
the short answer is I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to play a different role.
Yeah. I hope it doesn't go away, at least for my sake as well. Running.
Yeah, I can
Right.
promise you that I won't.
Yeah, yeah, I know it wouldn't go away. But something that you touched on that's pretty important is the need for like personalized experiences with
Yeah,
documentation. And
yeah,
like with solving problems, there isn't always a one size fits all approach to it, right? You can only have like a guesstimate or at least try to solve for the majority. And
yeah,
I feel like that world, like you said, there's always going to be the need to provide books to those that want to read and
yeah,
provide tablets to those that want to like scroll on the
yeah,
screen, or it could be like some AI input box. So looking at this, future world with personalized content, how do you feel walking towards that world AI can help with,
mm,
streamlining actual writing of the content? Because I
yeah,
think from my experience, at least, that's what a lot of technical writers spend the most time on. Have you given that a thought?
yeah. Um, the uh, yes, 100%. So the way I view it is very simple in the sense that I actually don't think um, the world of assistive writing is actually that different than the world of, like, assistive programming or anything else in which the LMs are kind of exceeding at, whether it's writing
Hmm.
technical docs, like legal docs. Um, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the LLMs, in terms of, is pretty good at taking directives now, right? Like, I think it's becoming reliable enough where, like, it's able to know kind of what you're looking to kind of, express and communicate, still with
Hmm.
some sort of your judgment and guidance in terms of whether this is the right answer or not. And it's pretty good at taking, let's say, a bullet point of commands and then going and executing that in longer form. And
Yeah.
so the way in which I've really viewed, LMs in terms of writing docs is again not really different than in coding or anything else, which is that, like, like, it puts humans at the driver's seat, but then enables, in my opinion, like, a lot of efficiency gains,
Hmm.
because fixing grammar suddenly became, a lot easier in scale,
Yeah.
right? A lot of pages. Giving an outline and then getting to a rough draft has been a lot faster. you know.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to now type all the sentences. You can just kind of use cursor and just tab things through, right?
Yeah.
To get an
Yeah.
idea. It's getting a lot faster, but like
Mhm.
make no mistake, I don't think AI is gonna know what to write about for at least a
Yeah.
little bit.
I think that's a good point that you made here. Directives. I feel like technical writers of tomorrow should focus on being able to give the right directions
Yeah.
and being able to help, like, make the right judgment so the AI tool, whatever tool it is, knows what to do. And I think that's something we at Hackmamba spend most of, like, majority of our time now is around, like, structuring the documentation, for instance, defining developer intent.
Yeah.
There's a pretty handy resource I share with, like, any technical writer that comes on board at Hackmamba. It's this documentation system written by the folks at DVO.
Yeah.
And it pretty much nailed it with how you structure documentation. Some folks know this as the diataxis framework, but it basically just teaches you how to structure documents. And I guess when we're in this world where AI can successfully take these instructions and create some document out of it, it becomes really important that you're able to at least know what to tell it, like what to say to it um, to do. And also something that becomes even more important now is storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Uh, a number of times I also say to technical writers that there isn't a lot of room to tell stories in documentation because you
Yeah.
just want to, yeah, get an answer and bounce. But
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
places, like with some of our partners, we've seen that documentation is actually a good tool, is a good SEO tool for them. They're ranking
Mm,
on certain keywords, they're getting
yeah.
discovered and found
Yeah.
through their documentation. So they
Yeah.
want to add some, some piece that tries to convince a prospect or get someone, tries
Yeah.
to build trust,
Yes.
get someone to try out their tool. So these things and craftfully weaving them into the documentation
Yeah.
becomes super important.
Yeah. 100%. Agree with all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next up, so we've touched on, like, data and, like, getting all this data and having
Yeah.
AI tools
Yeah.
parse them. With
Mhm.
products, it's even a lot of data, and not just parsing the data to provide information. There's also parsing the
Yeah.
data to be able to take action,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is the foundation of why we have MCPs, right?
Yeah.
The Model Context Protocol by
Mhm.
Anthropic.
Yeah.
It feels like the solution today to any problem is just make an open standard for for it,
Yeah.
right? But we've seen LLMs at TXT, and now we've seen MCPs, and MCPs are all the rave right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And I know you've also done some work around MCPs, so could you share your thoughts around those
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
why you
Yeah.
think it would help advance technical documentation creation in general?
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, so that's a good question. So I have a really funny story about MCPs and all of this stuff, which is we're fortunate enough to work with the wonderful folks and team at Anthropic for their docs. And I remember like sometime in like middle or early of November, Anthropic out of nowhere was like, "Hey guys, we like to use Mintlify and request a new set of docs for like this new random open source project that we got cooking up." And
Yeah,
we're like, "Sure, yeah, we'll help spin it up." Like happy to help in any way we could. What's the name of this? And they're like, "Oh, it's called the Model Context Protocol." And I remember thinking and telling my team, I was like, "What a horrible name! Like, what's like, why, why is it so long? What does that make sense? Like, what is Entropic trying to get at here? Like, and all of that, all that stuff launched end of November,
November. Yeah,
end of
25th.
November.
I
I
had
think
to
it
go
was
look at the
November 20
date.
something. And all I remember was like just thinking, I was like, I didn't really get what this is. Like, I remember reading it and I was like, it doesn't really make so much sense what like they're trying to get at. And then I think, kind of just sat there for probably about the span of like maybe 2 months. And then I think in early January, maybe like middle January, maybe like sometime in around that time, people started to have some conversations about it. I've heard people say they're going to build an MCP server, and I was like, oh, like that thing, that Anthropic built. Could you explain to me a little bit what it is? And I think at that moment, I heard probably the really like one of the best descriptions for it that really kind of got my attention, and then I think kind of made me believe in it much later, which is, you guys ever watched like the Iron Man movie? Like, have you ever watched like like the Avengers movie?
Which one? All of
Any of
them.
them, right? All of them,
All
all of them.
of
Yeah.
them. All
No,
of them.
all of them. There you go.
All. Yeah.
Like how Iron Man has Jarvis,
Yeah.
and like in the movies, Tony Stark is always going like, "Hey Jarvis, could you like go adjust the suit? Could you go like bring me this thing, or could you go bring me like turn off the lights or something like that?" It was like it's like just like all these cool things that you can ask this AI to do, and I think it's funny because that's pretty off the mark from what like AI was in the form of ChatGPT, right? Or LLMs in general. Because if you were to go ChatGPT today and you're like, "Hey, could you go turn on the lights, or could you go bring me a drink or something like that?" It would just be like, what the fuck? I can't do that, right?
Sorry, I cannot do that.
Yeah, exactly. Or even something like even simple programmatic. It's like, "Hey, could you go like, I don't know, turn on YouTube or something like that."
Yeah.
It doesn't really do that. And so I think the idea of MCPs is it enables AIs to actually it builds that bridge between what LLMs could do and the actual performative functionality, the arms and legs, if you will, of actually being able to execute certain functions. So, if for instance, you're building a service that allows people to make calls, right? Or automates, let's say, dialing up a phone and making a call. An MCP server would be able to connect that service to the LLM so that you can ask Claude, be like, "Hey, could you go make a call?" And it would go ahead and be able to do that for you.
Yeah. Why? So would you say like MCPs are an alternate REST API protocol? Like we had like REST APIs that you could, once you had a REST API, you could just call, make a post request or get request, and get some data back. So would you say MCPs are what REST APIs are, but for AI tools?
Yeah. I don't necessarily think it's a replacement of REST. I actually think it's a way to connect those REST APIs to the LLMs, because nowadays we at Mintlify, we're working on helping companies build MCP servers, and essentially the practice of doing that is just just simply like describing those endpoints and then calling those endpoints. So all of the foundation still lives very much within REST APIs.
But it provides additional context. I guess that's why it's model context protocol.
It does.
Just provides context on what those APIs are. So would you say like an MCP then is a form of documentation?
It is, absolutely. And I think what's more important than all of this is less than it being like a form of documentation, which definitely is the idea that what it truly is at the end of the day is it's a way of enabling users to be able to use your services. Right?
Yeah.
That's all it is. Sometimes if you, let's say, want to, go make a phone call with like this, let's say you're building a service that gets people to make a phone call. You could have someone go read all the docs, figure out how to make an endpoint, and integrate it into your services. Right. And that's great, and for that specific use case, that's awesome. But there's going to be a future where people are like, "Hey, I just want to be able to perform this action. I actually just want to go make a phone call." You can go to your ChatGPT, be like, "Hey, could you go make a phone call?" And it would just go ahead and be able to do that for you. And it's just so much, it's a lot easier for the users or for the type of people who might prefer that in the future. And so this goes back again into the first principles of it all, which is like, what is the purpose of writing docs, right? Or at least in our opinion, it's to get people an answer, right? It's to, have people figure out, what they don't already know. And going into our thesis and the Mintlify, mindset of it all is that it's at the end of the day, it's all about that, right? And docs obviously do an incredible job at highlighting, the product, the feature, answering questions. But now with a lot of things happening in AI, it also enables that in different ways. And so I view the role of like, technical writing to also, change a little bit, in the sense that I think it will like, be reframed around like that general problem statement. And there are going to be more than just writing docs. It'll also be potentially building and managing these MCP protocols, these MCP servers as well.
Yeah. So you did mention that you help teams and companies currently build these MCP servers. How's that work going? How does that work even?
Yeah.
And how can
So,
you help anyone in the audience do that?
yeah, exactly. So this was kind of like an interesting thing that we realized when MCP servers came out, and we were kind of just initially doing a lot of the experiments with it. It's literally that everything that you need to build an MCP server, which again, let's break it down. It's like what functions, what tools there are, the context, like you mentioned, which are literally just descriptions of what a specific endpoint or a function does, and the attributes of that endpoint, right? So for instance, like, what are the headers? What are the body requests of that specific API endpoint? That's all it needs to go build any MCP server. And as it turns out, all of that stuff is already in the docs.
Yeah.
You've already, kind
That's
of like
page one of like API.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly page one docs. Exactly. And then it has more, right? So like there's other context that you can feed it that is more rich in context. And so what we realized immediately was like, like we thought we needed to ask people to, go like add more stuff or configure more stuff. But no, like truly all you need to go build an MCP server is already there. And in that world, can we help you get it up faster? Right? Can we actually just help you, make it happen? And so we literally just, through an experiment, put it together, and it worked phenomenally. Right? So you could just literally download an MCP server that's generated by Mintlify. And again, this just came out like pretty recently, I dare say.
Yeah. Wait, so if I hear you correctly, you say if I have a product and I want to create an MCP server for it so that I can have an MCP client like Cursor or Cloud Code or some to ingest data or get information from my tool or perform actions on my tool.
Yeah.
Meaning I want an MCP server for it. You can bundle that from the documentation and serve that to me.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I realized I should have had like the demo spun up locally.
Yeah. So
let me see if I can just like work out like a quick demo just for folks who might not have seen or like what that looks like. I'd be more than happy to just put this together and then just kind of give folks a real demo of it.
I think that'd be great. And I also have like so many questions because I haven't tried MCPs myself. But then I have questions around like security and authentication, and how do you stop anyone from spamming your systems through an MCP server? How does all that work? But I want to see a demo.
Absolutely. Demos
Someone
are cool.
comment also echoes this. Demo would be helpful.
I'm with you. Let's get a demo up and running. Give me just 1 second. I think that would be super, super cool for everyone.
Do you have a resource on how to do this?
We do. We have it written in some sparse docs in Mintlify right now. We're still working on a lot of like more educational content in terms of how to build one, how to set all that stuff up. But I can give you an example. Okay.
Yeah, I found content from March 6th.
Perfect. I can share my screen and because I got the demo up and running.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Let's see. Window. Awesome. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh.
Let me see. 1 second. Yeah.
Perfect.
That's Claude. Good morning, Han.
Good morning. Awesome. So this is just like Claude Desktop, which is one of the different ways in which you can go run an MCP server right now. It's also available, for instance, in like Cursor and Windsurf and soon to be many other clients. But very simply, this is just Claude. And again, Anthropic built the MCP protocol. So obviously, they can imagine they supported it for themselves. And once you notice that you're on Claude, the first thing you'll probably notice is that there's not anything different, except for this little like tools section in the bottom right section right here. And this is 34 MCP tools. So this means that we already have the package, the server installed, and right now it's loaded with all of these different functionality right here.
Yeah.
And I'm just realizing this is a previous loaded version. So I'm just going to restart my server. Give me 1 second just to make sure I'm on the right one. Sorry, going to give me 1 second.
Yep, worth the wait.
Yeah.
We're getting some MCP magic. Well, for anyone listening to this, I put a link, at least the earliest one the latest I could find on generating MCP servers for your documentation. This was written by Han as well. And it introduces MCP servers and how to get one. So you could check out this document after. We should send all this information via email as well. Yes. After this webinar.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm just currently going through the process of running it right now, just to make sure that it's all good to go.
You're really trying the demo gods, Han.
Exactly.
These things never work.
It really does. Exactly. It should give me 1 second. I'm almost there. Oh man, why has it got to do this to me today? Okay.
It just has to.
It just has to fail. Exactly. It can't get working. Give me 1 second. I'm just about there. Okay. Fantastic. Awesome.
I see Tiffany is doing the Lord's work in the comment, answering questions.
Man, it's so weird. I don't know why it's not working right now. There's like a weird bug going on. I might have to go do a separate demo, and I'll just post it for everybody. I apologize for the wait and inconvenience here. Happy to answer some of the questions in the meantime. I guess the demo gods just weren't as kind today.
Yeah, it never works. I was like, I hope it does, but almost never works.
I promise I'll follow up everyone in the email. We'll record a demo and I'll get one for you guys. I promise. I promise the show. We're gonna make it happen.
Yeah. There's a question in the comment that says, what's the risk of drift when MCPs are updated in one place but reused elsewhere? And how can AI help flag or prevent that?
Yeah.
And Tiffany had an answer. She said, like, part of the benefit of auto-generating MCP servers from documentation is that whenever your docs are updated, the corresponding servers will also update. So it's just the behavior, it's just the experience currently.
Yeah. So the way that, that's a good question. So the way that we look at this is that MCP servers are similar to SDKs for those familiar or might be writing docs for SDKs. You might be familiar that like SDKs, the whole idea of SDK management is kind of a tricky one in the engineering world, where sometimes your APIs and all of your actual services might change, but then someone needs to go and update the SDKs as well so that the functionality basically match. I actually view it exactly the same in MCPs.
Okay.
I view MCPs as almost like an SDK for LLMs. Right. So you have to almost maintain the separate package for them. You have to also maintain like the separate instance for them. And it does get a little tricky. And I think to your point, for a lot of companies who might choose to go maintain them, are probably going to deal with these kind of issues. But again, at the trade-off of potentially more customization, more flexibility. And so I think the opinion that we have at Mintlify is that like it's much easier to get it up and running if you're able to generate it. But also, as Tiffany mentioned, is that if it's coming from content within the docs, then you don't need to worry about maintaining both the docs and the MCP servers from out of date. You just worry about the endpoints, the docs itself, and it naturally will.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Just like any SDK, when you update the API spec, you auto-generate the SDKs if you auto-generate them, and they just update. Yeah, that's really cool. So your demo's gonna come after this.
Well, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I have a final question,
yeah.
which is how far away are we from self-managing docs, right? So,
Yes.
full disclosure, I'm trying to know how long I have until I'm out of a job writing great documentation at Hackmamba for our clients. So, what you think of that?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is that I don't believe that like this is a role to be replaced anytime soon. And I don't think that's the way in which I think I view things, frankly. And very candidly, I actually, again, I always try to draw parallels because, I have like an engineering background. So, I think of it from like a, software engineer perspective as well, which is that writing and managing docs in the role of a technical writer is in parallel track to the world of software engineering right now in terms of how AI is changing it, right?
Yeah.
Like AI is, for instance, even today, like definitely shaking up, the software development world because there's Cursor, there's Claude Code, there's all these tooling that everyone's using nowadays. And it's like, using AI to write and, all the code. And naturally, kind of like when people saw this, obviously the concern was like, oh, like, are you looking to replace jobs? Right? Like, is this going to something that's going to dramatically impact, what I'm going to do in about a year or two? And the reality of it is that it hasn't shaped up like that at all, right? In software engineering, right? Even though there are, these things like, vibe coding, the products and there's, the cursor and stuff, all that we've seen is just, it made folks more productive, right? As another tool, right? It's done a great job at, making software engineering happen a little faster, getting prototypes out there a little easier, right? Fixing bugs a little faster, testing things a little easier. And like all these things kind of like compounded, right? And I view that the same way with technical writing and docs in general, which is that, now that there's LLMs to help draft content, with help editing content, with help like, reviewing content, it certainly makes the job a lot easier. Does LLMs actually go in? But the real question of like, doing any of this work is not about just, I'm sure you understand, William, better than anybody. It's not just about writing the stuff, right? It's about deciding what actually goes into it, deciding like what is the user journey that needs to be mapped out, that needs to go and actually put into paper, the interviews with users and customers and the folks within the company to figure out how all that needs to come together. Reading Slack messages, inferring, from the product and all of these things that still is innately intuitive for humans, just like it is for building products. I think it's still going to be very much alive and well in technical writing. And going back to, what I mentioned earlier is that LLMs are great at, enabling and assisting and taking directions. I think it will be like that for the foreseeable future. And whenever the day in which LLMs or AI could go and figure all that stuff out and do everything itself, then to be honest, none of us, including myself, know what that's going to be like.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah. For better or worse, like, I mean, that point, like, everybody's going to look for,
for something
out of
go
the
fly
bottom.
or something.
To which point, I don't know. The solution is that like UBI or something.
Yeah, you're right. I think once you said you opened with you're certain that LLMs aren't going to take out technical writers. I could feel like the sigh of relief from the comments, even though like I could feel the weight of also for myself. But I totally agree. And something that's interesting, I always want to take the time out to share this is in the last year we've seen increased demand for our services at Hackmamba, for instance, which is creating human written documentation, and not just that, but also carefully designing the documentation to speak to people, to speak to engineers. and anyone that would just consume it. We've seen increased demand in the last 1 year. A number of my friends were like, William, you're trying to go into like creating technical content when AI is taking like everyone's content jobs. I was probably going to be homeless or something in this time, but we've seen more demand for this, and even more so, teams wanting an opinion, right? Wanting like a strong opinion. I mean, we've always automatically generated documentation for the last maybe 10, 12 years with like Swagger, and the Open API spec has been around for a while. So API documentation for a large part has been automatically generated for a while now. But it's the overall experience of delivering that content that's supposed to solve unique problems. And human problems are very dynamic, right? It's never static. And the documentation helps solve that. And I feel like the combination of having AI with the right context on this documentation written by someone is just the value add is just going to be so immense.
Yeah, exactly. I think this, like, without trying to, bring this into a larger conversation about like, like AI and its impact in the world, and all that stuff is, I've only seen, I think, in practice, like in every step of it, when there's these kind of like, advancements and, in tooling or machinery or technology, there's like this natural kind of reaction, which is like, hey, like I'm a little bit afraid of like what's to come. Is it going to replace, jobs? Is it going to kind of displace things? And I think the way that I've typically looked at this is, I mean, the blunt answer is like, yes, it's going to replace roles. I think for sure. Like there's certain roles that's going to like maybe change in the meaning of it. Like, but I think it's going to enable other people to go do other, like aspects of this that solve problems at like a more fundamental kind of level, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think
100%.
Yeah. And I think the way that I've only viewed it in practice right now is it's just made everyone more productive, right? To Emily's point, all it's done is that, to date is I've only seen it enable more like faster developer cycles, and I can imagine the same you mentioned is happening in developer docs. I can only see that accelerating.
Yeah, you're right. I see AI as electricity, right? We could do a lot of things by hand, manually, but with electricity, we ended up doing a whole lot more. Electricity brought about even what we know today as AI and information technology in general. So I see AI as just an efficiency driver for something else that would come, because as humans, we'll always want to be more efficient and way more efficient. I have a very okay. I think I'll save this opinion for later. I was going to say,
Oh no, say
I feel
it.
like
What is it?
I feel like I cannot remember where I saw this, but it's this dystopian machine where everyone's plugged in and we just live in like some subconscious. That's why I wanted to save this
Oh,
opinion for later.
like the Matrix.
But we're so efficient that we don't need to do a lot. We just need to think.
Yeah.
And we think, and that's enough. Like you think, and that's enough. But that's a different conversation. A different conversation for sure. But aside this, do you have, before we get to comments or before we get to questions, is there anything you want to share about Mintlify? Personally, I'm super hyped about like Mintlify because you guys help my life like be so much better. So I'm just curious if there's something else you want to share. Do you have like some release that's coming up or something that you've just announced that you want to give us like the sneak peek?
Yeah. I'm usually not one to go and brag or and self promo a lot. But obviously, we have Mintlify, take a lot of pride in working with a lot of great technical writers, such as yourself, William, and many others. If there's anything that you guys, are looking for in terms of, would really truly work for you, and you have any thoughts or feedback, in terms of how we can help, just let us know. We take a lot of pride in, focusing on user experience and really building the best platform that we could. And if anyone has any thoughts and and how please let us know.
Yeah.
Oh, I moved.
Oh,
There
you
you go.
moved. Okay.
I moved rooms. We were troubleshooting this live. Yeah.
You had to ditch your whole
Just
setup. It's like ditch the whole thing.
I give up. I give up. I don't know what's going on. This seems to work a lot better here.
Yeah. Well, guys in the chat, Han is on
Yeah.
Tiffany.
I'm with
And
Louis.
the show
I think
goes
guys
on.
to stop me from making this happen. That's my guess.
Yeah, they're trying to stop you, but we have to continue. So I guess the best way to test this now is to answer the question, and if you can complete it, and we know
Exactly.
That's the best way now.
Yeah. So in short, we're seeing a lot of really good help with these tools in assistive writing. It's the best sous chef anyone can ask for right now. And I think that as it evolves, my guess is that it will do a better job at understanding the context further and further ahead of before you trying to when you're going to want to write it. But as far as what that goes with the details, I think that's time could tell. Everything's moving so fast nowadays, so it's really hard to get a good sense of it.
Yeah. Well, but I guess it's interesting that your folks at Mintlify, they are like you're on top of these and always trying to help folks ship better documentation.
That's the goal. Yeah. One thing that we do certainly believe in is the bar for develop or just any sort of content ingestion experience now is so different than it was, even a few years ago. And because, before it was really, about building a platform where there could be just, a lot of good content on the platform.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing now is now you need, for instance, things like llms.txt. Now you need things like AI chat. Now you need to have your content be ingestible for, Cursor, for Claude, and for all of these different places. Now you potentially need to build MCP servers. Now you need to generate them. Now you go and manage all of these different things. And it just seems like a lot of the bar for developer experience or just user experience in general is rising a lot more. And I think the way that we view one of our jobs is we kind of view ourselves helping companies lift that bar up as they do, so that people aren't kind of feeling in a few months from now they're or a year from now they're behind. Even we as a company trying to push on this is having a hard time with all the things that's happening right now. It's just moving so fast. But that's a big part of, I think, how we view it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And I think I saw Tiffany shared mcpt.com, which is sort of handpicked MCP servers from Mintlify. I mean, it looks really good to start with the website.
Thank you. Yeah, MCPT is one of our new kind of think of it almost like experiments in some ways. We are just really looking to kind of build out something for help people discover and use MCP servers a little bit better. I think there's a lot of a barrier in the space, which is not knowing how to find the servers and also it not being super easy to use. And so we felt that, that there was something that could help people with discovering a little better and being able to use it a little bit better. It's still super early, so there's a lot of things that we want to do for it that we haven't been able to just yet. But I would certainly say stay tuned, as I think there's going to be a lot to come in this.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now I'm thinking about what to build an MCP for, so I can get on that list, because I can imagine eventually the SEO juices it's going to be good. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. And we have a question here from Christine. It says, I wanted to know how folks with no formal experience with technical writing, working with docs, can gain experience in implementing AI when creating documentation.
Yes,
I'll probably answer this because I work with technical writers every day. Well, I would say formal experience, especially in tech. I don't know if anyone had formal experience somewhere before starting. So I would just say start. Look for open source projects to contribute to get some experience. But if you do not have experience and you want to implement AI when creating documentation, then I think it will be a bit difficult because you need some context as to how documentation systems work, how to structure a documentation, how to write one, the tone. Google has like a really good style guide. You can start from there, but you need some foundational knowledge as to how documentations work before jumping right into MCPs and how you can convert docs into like an MCP server. At least that's what I think is you need some foundational experience or at least knowledge of this. And there are tons of tutorials and pieces of content out there to get started with technical writing for documentation.
Yeah.
Han, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's just a matter of just trying out some of the things that's out there and just kind of seeing seeing kind of how that workflow works for you. And it might be different for everybody, right? Like I actually personally like myself again, as more of an engineer, I like to write docs now in Cursor. That's just the workflow that I prefer. Some people prefer to, use, the Claude tooling. Some people prefer OpenAI's tooling. There's tons of others now out there that, also wants to help with writing or assistive writing or, like automating some of these things too. I just recommend trying it out. There's really no one answer for this.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I see we're coming to the end of this. At the start, I promised to share how we've been getting, at least how we've gotten some of our content or Hackmamba indexed on LLMs. And here it goes. It's really not that difficult. We've just focused on like some answering long tail questions. So questions that folks would ask, like folks would ask their boss. And we create content around that. And we use some of that in documentation as well. So I've been experimenting with this personally with some of our partners to also see. So in the introductory sections of like your documentation, ask yourself, if someone had a problem, how would they try to find an answer? Which is almost like what you do with SEO and targeting like queries, but rather than it being like very short, try to think about it like being long tail, because whoever, like a user would ask ChatGPT or Perplexity the same question in the same long tail format, and what they do is look at different sources. At least with Perplexity, they would deep research, search for all pieces of content that match that sort of advice, right? That feels like you've given someone or someone is requesting for an advice, and then they'd return that in the LLMs. So basically, just write content that sounds like an advice, either in your docs, in your docs, or in blog content. And over time, as these models are getting updated with new content on the internet, they tend to surface all the advice. It's also why folks now go to Stack Overflow, because Stack Overflow was mainly filled with like advices from people and suggestions that felt a bit too personal, right? But you'd go to ChatGPT and you get like the same answers. So just applying this strategy to the documentation, especially like the conceptual like information in introductions, guides, glossaries, those are some of the bits that we've seen that's helped our content, and not just our content but our brand, show up in Perplexity and in ChatGPT when using deep research. So I hope that was helpful for anyone listening to this. So I don't see any other question here. I'm going to send, like, after this, probably within a day, within 24 hours, we're going to send a summary link to this webinar, alongside obviously links to Mintlify. If you're interested in creating great documentation for your team, either you do not have like the capacity or the expertise, you want to structure great like documentation to look like Stripes or Twilios, You can talk to us at Hackmamba, and we can help you, or not, or we ask someone else to help you. But I'll send all this information to you via email, and this for folks listening. And all the links that we have here, I'll try to go through them and see if I could include that also in the email. Any last words from you, Han?
No, I just want to say thank you, William, for helping put this together, and also for everyone who's watching. I really appreciate all the questions and the thoughtfulness. And I know for the folks that we are currently working with, thanks for coming today, guys. I really appreciate it. Let me know if there's anything we can do to help you even more. But really, truly grateful and had a ton of fun.
Yeah, anything we could do if you're looking to write docs, sign up on Mintlify. I said it, not Han, so it's not marketing at this point. All right, people. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Then, cheers.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. All right, take care.
Yeah, bye.